I was 53 days from retirement when the Dravathi fleet crossed the heliopause. I had served 26 years aboard the Terran synchronization array, and I had never once fired a shot. Neither had anyone before me. The array was not built to fire. It was built to be seen, all 1,440 platforms of it, linked by a single fire control grid, orbiting Earth at staggered altitudes across 3 concentric rings. When I took my first posting at Velketh Station in the Inner Ring, my commanding officer told me something I have since repeated to every junior watch officer who has served under me. She said, "The array is a question with one answer, and the answer is no. Do not forget that you are not the question. The array is." I did not fully understand her until the morning the Dravathi came. They arrived in system at 3:41 station time, and the first indication was a gravitational ripple in the outer sensor net, the kind produced by mass displacement drives coming out of fold transit in formation. The duty analyst on the lower deck, a young woman named Rake who had been with me 8 months, called up to me with the preliminary count before she had finished running the classification sweep. Her voice was steady, which told me she had been trained well. She said, 287 vessels confirmed, count still rising. I told her to keep running and went to my board. By the time the sweep finished, the count stood at 312. I had read the Dravathi file many times. Every watch officer on the array read it as part of orientation, and I had made it required reading for every person who served under my posting, because it was the reason the array existed. It was also the oldest active file in Terran Defense Command's archive, older than the array itself, older than the Terran consolidation, older than any institution that still bore its original name. The file had been opened 120,000 years ago, 2 years after a team of deep survey archaeologists working in the high desert of what had once been called the Gobi Basin uncovered a transmitter buried 4 meters below grade. The transmitter was still active. It had been broadcasting on a tight beam frequency that no one on Earth had ever used, a frequency registered, as it turned out, to the Dravathi Hegemony survey grid. The signal was a classification beacon, the kind a survey team plants to mark a site for future development. Its classification, unclaimed habitable. Its recommended disposition, resettlement eligible. The survey team had planted it 120,000 years ago, when humanity had not yet learned to smelt iron. I have thought about the people who made the decision that followed. They were not generals. The record shows they were a council of engineers, archivists, and a single xenolinguistics professor who had spent 30 years reconstructing dead signal protocols. They decoded the beacon's frequency and its content in 14 months. They spent another 4 years confirming that the Dravathi hegemony was real, was spacefaring, and would almost certainly send a resettlement fleet at some point in the next 100,000 years or so, because that was what the signal promised, and because the Dravathi, from every piece of evidence humanity had gathered about them, kept their promises. Then the council voted to build the array. It took 12,000 years. I think about that sometimes when the stations are quiet and there is nothing to do but watch the sensor boards and drink bad coffee and wait. 12,000 years of construction across 3 generations, no, across 300 generations of engineers who would never see the thing finished. They built it anyway. They built it because the people who came before them had started it, and because the people who came after them would need it, and because the signal was still broadcasting in the Gobi Basin, and the math on the Dravathi's travel time was not ambiguous. Humanity was ready. That was the word carved into the dedication plaque at Velketh Station's main corridor, and I had walked past it twice a day for 26 years. I had stopped reading it consciously a long time ago, the way you stop reading a word you see every day. Standing at my board at 4:12 station time, watching 312 Dravathi vessels decelerate into the outer system, I read it again. I sent the array-wide synchronization order at 4:17. What happened next is the part I find hardest to describe to people who were not there to see it. The sound, first, or rather the absence of it. The array's synchronization event produces a deep harmonic through the station's superstructure as 1,440 platform drives adjust attitude in unison, all of them slewing to the same bearing, all of them locking onto the same 312 targets simultaneously. It sounds like the station exhaling. I have heard it described that way by other watch officers, and I think it is accurate. It sounds like something very large and very patient letting out a breath it has been holding for a long time. On the display, it looks like a ring of light closing around the incoming fleet. Each platform marks as locked in sequence, inner ring first, then mid, then outer, and the track indicators tile across the board until every vessel in the Dravathi formation is bracketed. Rake counted the lock confirmations aloud from her station. She did not have to, but I let her because it mattered to say it out loud. 1,440, she said when the last one tiled, all locked. The Dravathi fleet had been decelerating. At 4:31, the deceleration rate increased sharply. By 4:49, the formation had come to a full stop at the edge of the outer sensor net. They were holding position at approximately 3.7 astronomical units from Earth, well outside any range that could be called an approach. They were just stopped, 312 vessels sitting in the dark of the outer system, not advancing and not retreating. I understood what they were doing. They were looking at us. I cannot know what their sensors showed them when they swept the array. I cannot know what their commanders said to each other in the hours that followed. I can tell you what they transmitted, because I have the log in front of me. At 5:11, the Dravathi fleet broadcast a query on the same frequency as the survey beacon, the same tight beam channel that had been broadcasting out of the Gobi Basin for 120,000 years. The query, translated by the array's linguistic system in under 4 minutes, was brief. It asked for the current classification status of the designated resettlement site. I wrote the response myself. I had prepared it years earlier, in the way you prepare things you believe you may someday need, but I wrote it fresh that morning because it felt important that it not be a stored reply. It was one line. It said survey beacon acknowledged, classification updated, site status occupied. I transmitted it on the same frequency. Then I waited. The Dravathi fleet held position for 6 hours and 11 minutes. I do not know what their deliberations looked like. I know that in those 6 hours, the array held synchronization without a single platform breaking lock, 1,440 attitude drives making microcorrections every few seconds for 6 hours, tracking the fleet's minimal positional drift, maintaining coverage on all 312 vessels without interruption. The system performed exactly as designed. It had been designed to wait, and it was waiting, and it was very good at it. At 16:44, the formation broke, not toward Earth, away. 312 vessels coming back up to transit velocity in a slow, organized withdrawal, the way a fleet moves when it has made a decision, and the decision is not to continue. I watched them go. Rake tracked the drive signatures until they folded out of the sensor net's range at 22:19. Then she marked the board clear and turned in her chair to look at me. I held the synchronization order for another 30 minutes after the last signature faded. Not out of caution, though caution would have been warranted. I held it because it seemed right to hold it. Because the array had waited 120,000 years for this morning, and 30 more minutes was not very much to ask. I released the order at 22:51. On the board, the 1,440 lock indicators cleared in sequence, outer ring first, then mid, then inner, and the platforms returned to resting orientation. The harmonic ran through the station again, that low exhale of mass moving in unison. I logged the event in the station record, 312 vessels. Time in system, 18 hours 38 minutes. Resolution, withdrawal without engagement. Then I made coffee badly and sat at my board, and watched the outer sensor net for another hour in the quiet. Rake said nothing, which was the correct thing to do. I retire in 53 days. I have told people I feel nothing about it, and that is mostly true. But I will tell you this. I will miss the sound the array makes when all 1,440 platforms lock at once. That long, even exhalation, 120,000 years in the making. I have never heard anything more patient in my life.